Hello there, this is Senris. In this video we'll be discussing the political ideologies of the various races and legendary lords in Total War Warhammer 2, which I'll be referring to as Total Warhammer 2 because the official name is obnoxious. Let's start with the easy mode race, the High Elves. Fittingly, they have chosen the easy mode ideology. They are all social democrats. They have a high standard of living compared to the other races and think of themselves above the fray of war and imperialism, despite half of them spawning on other continents and all of them having victory conditions involving the genocide of at least one other faction. Tyrion is the high elf equivalent of a European that wants to unite all of Europe under the EU and is way too enthusiastic about NATO. He wants to keep the Dark Elves out, the Empire in, and the Chaos Warriors down. Teclis is a South American sockdem that considers himself better than his neighbors to the north, but don't ask him about his policies leading to the destruction of the rainforest and mass disenfranchisement and mass death of the indigenous population. He thinks of himself as an Allende but is more of a Bolsonaro. Alariel is the United Kingdom of Total Warhammer 2. She wants to unite Turf Island under her banner, and she is antagonistic towards northerners and people living on that island nearby. She doesn't see any sort of contradiction between having a strong social democracy and monarchy, and she doesn't think the fact that she is a literal queen has anything to do with that. Alithanar is basically the living embodiment of the saying, social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism, as his victory condition is to kill all the Dark Elves, kill all the Lizardmen, and unite all elves under his banner. Democratically, of course. Eltharion is a teenage debate bro stan. He thinks socialism is when you have free healthcare, and he has no problem with imperialism, invasion of foreign countries as long as it's by the good guys, and imprisoning so-called enemies of the state forever in a black site with no trial. Imric is like one of those Canadians that is weirdly supportive of US foreign policy and has no problem with sending troops to the other side of the world to fight and die for US energy corporations, to the point where he enlisted himself. Despite having superior weaponry to the locals, I don't think he will ever make it back to Calgary. Next up is the Lizardmen.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
It is with great shame that I admit they are one of my favorite races to play because they are all ethno-nationalists. While varied in their motivations and ideologies, they all think that they are the old one's chosen race and hate the other races nearly as much as they hate the forces of chaos. They want to kick all the other races out of Lustria and in some cases annex lands outside of Lustria as well. Lord Mazdamundi wants to secure the existence of the Lizardmen and a future for skinks. He's been around for a long time and has seen it all. He's basically the Grand Wizard of the Lizardmen. Krotkar is not content to turn just Lustria into a lizard ethno-state. He's decided to sail to the other side of the world and turn that into an ethno-state too. Due to the difficulty in maintaining supply lines, lack of nearby allies, and the inevitability of communist freedom fighters to show up on like turn 60, his attempts at establishing a colony will probably go about as well as Rhodesia. Tehennowin is more focused on the religious aspects of racial supremacy, specifically decapitating as many human sacrifices as possible to please Sotek. If he's being honest, he'll admit he doesn't really care about the lizard supremacy stuff that much. He just likes seeing heads roll like that guy in Apocalypto. Sotek cares not from whence the heads roll, only that they roll. Tic-Tac-Toe is just a dumb kid that spent too much time on 4chan and uncritically accepted everything he heard on Poll. His mom eventually found out he was saying a bunch of racist shit online, so she blocked 4chan on the family computer. Now he spends a lot of time on the Destiny subreddit. Nakai the Wanderer is a boomer uncle on Facebook that posts minion memes about how much he loves the police. He's not an outright racial supremacist, and he doesn't even think he's racist at all. He just thinks that if lizards want to have a gated community where only lizards are allowed to live, then there's nothing wrong with that, and other races should do the same. He lives in one of the aforementioned communities about 30 miles north of Boise, Idaho. Gorok is one of those hippity-hoppity get off my property ANCAPs. He wants to be able to own tactical nukes and deploy them against anyone who violates the NAP by stepping on his property. Unfortunately for him, the Lizardmen economy is shit and he will never be able to afford a third army, much less a nuke. Oxyotl is just a straight-up fascist. He has a weirdly intense fixation on ancient arcane secrets like portals and magic blowpipes. He's decided that invading the treacherous tundra of the largest country in the world in the middle of winter is somehow a good idea. What could go wrong? The Dark Elves are anarcho-capitalists and libertarians. They have a strong economy built on deregulation, blood sacrifice, and slavery. While not as overly ethno-nationalist as the Lizardmen, almost all of them are racist and imperialists, believing that only Dark Elves should live in Nagorond and that Ulthuan, the ancestral home of all elves, rightfully belongs to them. Malekith is the founding father of the Dark Elves. He has many slaves, aspires towards manifest destiny, and hates unionized autonomous collectives. He has mommy issues, but will sometimes work together with her. Speaking of mommy, Marathi is kind of like the founding mother of the Dark Elves. She has a lot of ideological overlap with Malekith, but prefers diplomacy and soft power over overwhelming force most of the time. But sometimes she shows up on your doorstep with 5 armies on turn 50, war decks you if you don't play ball, and puts you on the back foot for the rest of the game. She's kind of like the IMF of Total Warhammer 2. Hellebron is one of those women from 2016 BuzzFeed articles who didn't realize the guy they had a crush on was a crazy racist until she found herself going to white pride rallies. She thought his views on Jewish conspiracies, low IQ races, and slavery being justified if you consent to being a slave were just normal guy stuff. She eventually got out of her toxic relationship, but not before she was sent to jail for being an accessory to several hate crimes and going on an unauthorized field trip to the capital. Lokir Felhart is a guy that thinks of himself as just an honest businessman, despite owning an armada of mercenary ships which raid, pillage, and enslave anyone unfortunate to come across him. He routinely sacrifices hundreds of slaves to summon more Black Arcs, but considers that the cost of doing business. Malice Darkblade is an insane objectivist that is way stronger than he looks. He's like the Senator Armstrong of Total Warhammer 2. He takes the whole libertarian voluntary slavery thing to the next level, as he is not content to just kill and enslave lizardmen for profit, he even turns their pets into slaves. Rakarth is like the Joe Exotic of the Dark Elves. He doesn't really care about politics, besides deregulation of laws around owning exotic animals. That, and he wants to assassinate that bitch Alariel.
I consider that bitch to be one of the biggest terrorists in the exotic animal world right now.
On to the Skaven. The Skaven are all neoconservatives that want to exert influence all over the world. They are willing to use slave battalions, chemical warfare, and even nuclear weapons to achieve power. They regularly invade, destabilize, and topple their neighbors' governments with assassinations. Despite subjecting their citizens to wage slavery, or just actual slavery, no healthcare, and no education, they consider themselves to live in the greatest country on earth. Queek Headtaker is the Alan Dulles of the Skaven. He's responsible for more coups, assassinations, and proxy wars than any of the Skaven. He hates the communists even more than most Skaven, and will spend most of his campaign trying to kill their democratically elected leaders. He also killed JFK.
Die, man things!
Lord Skrulk is one of those neocons that is outraged when other countries use chemical weapons on their own people, but who also has no problems when his country uses chemical weapons on their own people. He's also an anti-vaxxer that thinks we should just let everyone catch the plague. Tretch Craventail is a neocon so mask-off about bloodthirsty imperialism that even the other neocons don't like him. The Skaven hate him, the Dark Elves hate him, and the player base of Total Warhammer 2 really hate him. Even the liberals hate him, and they're the people that rehabilitated George W. Bush. Ikit Claw is one of those neocons that are stuck in the Cold War era. He still thinks stockpiling nuclear weapons, overthrowing communists that don't exist, and calling Ukraine the Ukraine are important in the year 2022. He specializes in toppling empires from within with special agents. He is still mad at the French for not agreeing to form a defensive alliance that one time 20 years ago, and still uses the term freedom fries. If Queek Headtaker is the Alan Dulles of the Skaven, Deathmaster Snikch is their Richard Bissell. For those of you who aren't politics-obsessed nerds like me, Bissell was the guy most responsible for planning the Bay of Pigs invasion, along with Dulles. He is also the grandfather of the racist, anti-Semitic, and transphobic YouTuber Sock Done Left, but I'm sure that has nothing to do with why he parrots State Department propaganda. Like Dulles and Bissell, Queek and Snikch have collaborated many times to assassinate greenskin communists, which they usually fail at. Throt the Unclean is the youngest of the Skaven legendary lords, and he's actually uncharacteristically young, come to think of it. Most neocons qualify for Social Security, but Throt is barely out of high school. You can find him at Turning Point USA conferences palling around with Dinesh D'Souza and Rudy Giuliani, or anywhere else young men who are too young to be wearing suits congregate. The Vampire Coast legendary lords have a mix of terminally online ideologies. The one thing that unites them is that they are all mods on obscure political subreddits. Luther Harkon is one of those NFT guys that is way too into Elon Musk. All of his apes were stolen, so he has to resort to piracy on the high seas to get more Ethereum so he can buy more shitty JPEGs. He looks forward to being a neo-feudal serf in a Tesla company town on Mars that pays him in Dogecoin, which he believes will definitely hit $1 this year. Count Noctilus is a card-carrying member of one of those pirate parties in Scandinavia. The most important political issues to him are digital direct democracy, abolition of copyright and patent laws, net neutrality, and legalizing all forms of digital piracy. His seed-to-leech ratio is so high that he hands out invitations to IP torrents like candy. Teenage Senris would have really liked this guy. Aranessa Saltspite is a Twitch politics streamer. She was a fascist 2 years ago, but then at the age of 31, she realized racism and genocide were bad actually. These days she is a reformed liberal who likes to remind her viewers to subscribe to her Twitch and join her Patreon.
$5 a month!
Silastra Direfin is an accelerationist anti-centrist. She hates liberals even more than the Skaven or Dark Elves do, and wants to destabilize society as fast as possible because anything would be better than the status quo. Her victory conditions involve destroying the liberal and conservative factions nearby, as well as building an opera house with a private balcony. If you're looking for a coherent ideology, I would steer clear of this one, but her campaign is actually pretty fun. Next, we have one of the oldest factions, the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings are all paleo-conservatives who think things were much better before cancel culture, the civil rights movement, sliced bread, the Enlightenment, and democracy were invented. The Tomb Kings go way back with the Lizardmen, and they get along well because of their shared ancient history and feelings of racial superiority to those around them. Settra the Imperishable is a great warrior that seeks a return to the ancient ways of Nehekara, the first human empire. He thinks all the younger races are arrogant and foolish, and that it is his duty to drag them kicking and screaming into the natural order of things, with the Tomb Kings at the top of the pyramid. Settra will never accept the leadership of anyone over him because
Settra does not serve.
Grand Hierophant Katep is like the Pope of the Tomb Kings' religious organization, the Mortuary Cult. He thinks that modern secular culture is the greatest contributor to the decline of Western civilization, whatever the fuck that means. Katep is strongly opposed to the separation of church and state and believes that theocracy is the best way to govern, with religious leaders deciding what is best for the people. High Queen Khalida is a conservative trad wife, or at least she would be if she was married. So instead, she is one of those conservative influencers that promotes modesty, chastity, and subservience towards male partners. Arkan the Black is one of those young conservative men that hate the Republican establishment and calls them cuckservatives for being too willing to play ball with political moderates and not conservative enough. His hostility results in a massive diplomatic penalty with other Tomb Kings, as they view him as a young radical that is rocking the boat too much. He will be on the front lines of the civil war within the Republican Party over the next couple years. The Empire is made up of normie liberals. They believe in manifest destiny, neoliberal economics, and that the Empire is the greatest country in the world. When the Empire invades their neighbors and annexes their lands, its citizens don't view that as imperialism, they view it as nation building and spreading democracy, which the Empire has a right and a responsibility to do. Despite not understanding what anarchism or communism are, the citizens of the Empire hate anarchism and communism almost as much as the neocon Skaven do. Karl Franz is the Barack Obama of the Empire. He's beloved by his people and is probably the best hope at uniting the Empire. Young, charismatic, and willing to commit wartime atrocities for the sake of arms manufacturing shareholders, he was the right man at the right time to continue an imperialist war started by his predecessor with a shit-eating grin. Volkmar the Grim is the Eric Swalwell of the Empire. No one cares about this guy or even knows who he is. Balthazar Gelt is the Pete Buttigieg of the Empire. He kinda came out of nowhere, his starting position sucks, and the best thing about him is the memes people make about him. Despite only being in charge of one town, the Emperor put him in charge of transportation for the entire Empire. For some reason, he does have a large following within the player base, and he will likely be Emperor someday. Marcus Wolfhart is one of those woke imperialist liberals that is hawkish enough to enlist himself and go fight for the profits of Lockheed Martin on the other side of the world. He is enjoying his time in the military but wishes they had more female drone operators of color and non-binary enhanced interrogation experts. When he gets out, he is looking forward to his career at a think tank that makes ads designed to get Zoomers to join the CIA.
I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
The Dwarfs are similar to the Empire as both are liberals, but the Dwarfs are the more technocratic, anti-populist, and proudly elitist wing of modern liberalism. They hold decades or centuries-long grudges against other factions that oppose them. They look down on blue-collar workers and crush their attempts at unionization whenever possible. To the Dwarfs, politics is about empowering those who have spent half their lives immersed in academia, those who are the best at following rules, and those who know better than the uncouth populists. Thorim Grudgebearer is one of those Hillary Clinton supporters that is still mad at Susan Sarandon, Bernie Sanders, Jill Stein, and a never-ending list of other people that he thinks made her lose. He has a "I'm still with her" bumper sticker on his Prius. Grombrindal is one of those liberals that hates the idea of universal programs and thinks everything should be means-tested. He thinks we should triple the amount of tax brackets but leave the highest one at $500,000 and that all social services should be based on your income. He thought that the idea of forgiving student loans for Pell Grant recipients who start a business that operates for 3 years in a disadvantaged community was the best idea since forcing everyone by law to be a customer of privatized insurance companies. Belagar Ironhammer is one of those liberal boomers that loves the Lincoln Project and op-eds by Bill Kristol and Rick Wilson. He gives half of his social security check to the Lincoln Project every month. He has the ability to summon a bunch of boomers on Twitter to remind you that if you take a loan out, you have to pay it back every time someone mentions student loan forgiveness. Ungrim Ironfist is the angriest K-Hive Twitter user you have ever encountered. He loves to slay on social media just like his queen slays his vice president. If you bring up Kamala Harris's approval ratings or something dumb she said, you will instantly be blocked and quote tweeted. Okay, finally, now I get to talk about the good guys of Total Warhammer 2. The Orcs are all socialists and not the democratic kind. While their specific ideologies are varied, they work together to combat liberalism, fascism, and imperialism. When all the Greenskins are united, they will have the power to declare a global war on poverty, alienation, and oppression. Grimgor Ironhide is an activist, union organizer, and candidate for the Communist Party of Blackcrag. He holds a bi-weekly reading group where they study the writings of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mao. He also helps supply the local free community fridge. His comrades describe him as the most committed communist they have ever met, and just a really nice, wholesome guy.
You'll burn my boots so far up your ass, you'll be tasting squid leather until you die. We shall be straight after.
Skarsnik is an Antifa super soldier and member of the elite Spec Ops Catboy division. His specialties include information warfare, signals intelligence, and information security. He's doxed over 10,000 fascists, and that guy that punched Richard Spencer and never got caught for it is rumored to be Skarsnik. Wurzag is somewhat of a spiritual leader for the Greenskins. He believes religion, particularly liberation theology, is entirely compatible with communism and that past socialist projects that embrace state atheism were misguided. Reddit users hate him. Grom the Paunch is a straight-up tanky, and I don't use that word lightly. While the High Elves call basically everyone to their left who disagrees with them tankies, Grom proudly embraces the term, and his plans would make Stalin look like an anarchist. He wants to roll his enemies right into the heart of the High Elves' homeland and seize it by force. Eltharian's private prisons will be converted to a re-education camp for all the revisionists, dissidents, and reactionaries. Azhag the Slaughterer is a chill guy that spends most of his time up north with the anarcho-communist Norskins, but he is also the leader of the local community defense organization, a role which he takes very seriously. When fascists arrive in his neighborhood, he handles them much more harshly than Skarsnik and the Catboy division. I can't really elaborate more without violating YouTube terms of service. The Vampire Counts are a collection of monarchists, Tories, and other strange British people. Manfred, who will insist that you use his full title, Sir Manfred von Karstein, first of his name, Count of Sylvania, and the one true Emperor, is one of those weird British people that is way too into monarchism. Whenever there's a royal wedding or any other anachronistic celebration of customs that should have died off half a millennia ago, he takes his day off from the Daily Telegraph to go watch with his mates. He is anxiously waiting to hear about the Queen's final form. Helmengorst is just your average British person. Vlad and Isabella von Karstein are a wealthy couple from Cockingham upon Templehoffshire, although they spend a lot of time on holiday at their manor in Obersteierton Church. Vlad is a conservative MP whose hero is Margaret Thatcher, his favorite food is beans on toast, and he thinks Jeremy Corbyn is a crazy communist whom the bobbies should put away in the loony bin, innit? Isabella is an author of children's books that are mostly read by women in their 30s. She is regarded as a feminist icon for some reason, despite her over-the-top transphobia and problematic characterization of women in her books, many of whom are racial stereotypes or shallow love interests that don't pass the Bechdel test. Heinrich Kemmler is a very old Tory lord. He hates the idea of secession from the crown and is opposed to Scottish independence, Welsh independence, and Irish republicanism. He's still mad about that one time the Yanks threw perfectly good tea into Boston Harbor, and he thinks Neville Chamberlain did nothing wrong. On to the other good guy faction, the Norskins. The Norskins are anarchists that have decided to move away from the liberal empire, dwarves, and elves and start communes in accordance with their values. While they come from many different philosophical camps, they all participate in mutual aid to make sure everyone in these communities has their needs met, and also communal defense to protect themselves from liberal imperialists and libertarian raids. Wulfric the Wanderer is an anarcho-communist and the closest thing the Norskins have to a leader. Unlike the Empire, the Norskins believe that supreme executive power derives from the mandate of the masses, and that strange god kings distributing magical warhammers is no basis for a system of government. All of Wulfric's decisions must be ratified by a special bi-weekly meeting by a simple majority in the case of internal affairs, but by a 2/3 majority in the case of more major issues. Wulfric's main focus is fighting the repression of Norskins by the Empire and building a society free of the violence inherent in the system of liberalism. Throg is more of an individualist anarchist. He's a big fan of Max Stirner, the anti-work subreddit, and the 1999 Seattle World Trade Organization protests, which he was a part of. He also took part in Occupy Wall Street and Chaz and went on tour with Leftover Crack for a few years in the early 2000s. The Brettonians are French. The Wood Elves are a motley crew of isolationist conservatives, preppers, QAnon types, and the like. They aren't united by a political ideology as much as a shared reactionary fear of conspiracies involving liberal elites, Hollywood actors, and human trafficking in the basements of pizza joints. Orion runs a local talk radio show where he constantly rails about how the Democratic Party is run by the Illuminati, which is run by Hillary Clinton, and their plans for harvesting most of the world's population for adrenochrome. He thinks every school shooting is a false flag by crisis actors so that Barack Hussein Obama can take your guns. He also sells strange health supplements and 5-gallon buckets of survival food. None of his products have been approved by the FDA or USDA, and he is currently facing a class action lawsuit for fraud. Durthu is an old-school, mostly apolitical prepper that has been living off-grid since the mid-90s. He took the Y2K virus very seriously and hasn't used electricity or computers since 1999. Due to his Luddite ways and the fact that he hasn't come out of the woods in over 20 years, not much is known about him. The Sisters of Twilight run a podcast where they mostly talk about QAnon and how Donald Trump will be reinstated as president next month. They host interviews with various odious figures such as Candace Owens, Steven Crowder, and Orion. Despite their proclamations about the coming storm and the dates at which God Emperor Trump will once again sit upon the Golden Throne being wrong repeatedly, the non-falsifiable orthodoxy of their belief system just leads them to add another layer to their conspiracies whenever it is pointed out that they were wrong. Drycha is an anti-vax mom that homeschools her kids so they don't have to wear masks. Even though her kids don't go to school, she goes to every PTA meeting to scream at teachers about masks and critical race theory. She is active in several anti-vax Facebook groups with other moms where they discuss how masks are satanic and communist, the impending civil war in which their cop husbands will unalive every liberal, and how all lives matter. Now, the Beastmen and Chaos have largely been forgotten by Creative Assembly and most of the player base of Total Warhammer 2. Because of that, I'm going to combine them into one faction and bang them out in a lightning round. Kazrak is an anarchitty from Portland that thinks anarchism is when you kick over trash cans and spread litter throughout the Pearl District. Malagor is a die-hard Jesse Ventura fan that is mad about the Green Party not coronating him as their nominee in 2020. Morgor has never voted, but he donated $4.20 to Mike Gravel, and he's a big fan of Cumtown and Chapo Trap House. Torox is a nihilist who believes in nothing.
He believes in nothing, Labolsky, nothing.
And just wants to cut off his enemy's Johnsons.
And tomorrow we come back and we cut off your Johnson.
Excuse me?
I said we cut off your Johnson!
Archaon is the caricatured version of what Fox News viewers think an anarchist is, someone who just wants to spread chaos and destroy civilization for its own sake. Kolek Suneater is a community organizer that helps provide school lunches to those who can't afford them. Sigvald the Magnificent is a sex-positive educator that is lobbying to end abstinence-only education. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to stay tuned for my next video, as well as a video on the politics of Total Warhammer 3. Peace.